All right, let's get into it. We're going to unpack the absolutely incredible story of how the Swiss watch industry faced, well, total annihilation, and then somehow reinvented itself into something completely new, and frankly, a little bit strange. The whole story really starts with a simple question. Just look at these two watches. They're from the same legendary company, Patek Philippe. On the left, you've got this subtle, elegant tool for, telling time, and on the right, a massive, instantly recognizable status symbol. So, how on earth did we get from that to this?
To really get this revolution, we first have to go back in time. We need to understand the world that was lost, what people now call the golden age of Swiss watchmaking. We're talking about the period right after World War II up to about 1970.
Back then, the goal was, well, it was simple and it was elegant. The absolute best watches were all about this one crucial trade-off. How do you make the most accurate timekeeping device you possibly can, but also make it as small and as thin as possible? It was all about pure engineering and this idea of quiet perfection.
And then, in the early 1970s, disaster strikes. And it wasn't just one thing either. It was this triple cataclysm, a three-headed monster that almost wiped the entire industry clean off the map.
So let's break down this perfect storm. First blow, Japanese competitors like Seiko suddenly became not just cheaper, but actually better at making mechanical watches. They were winning all the awards. Second blow, a global currency crisis makes Swiss watches drastically more expensive pretty much overnight. And finally, the nail in the coffin, quartz technology shows up. Suddenly, extreme accuracy and thinness, the two things the Swiss were best at, became dirt cheap and available to everyone.
The impact was just absolutely devastating. The number of Swiss watches being sold just fell off a cliff, dropping by nearly 2/3. Most of these legendary, centuries-old watchmakers were staring bankruptcy right in the face.
But here's where the story gets wild. This is the economic miracle. While the number of watches they sold plummeted, the industry's revenue, after a quick dip, went to the moon. How is that even possible? How do you sell way fewer watches but end up making more money than ever before?
Well, a handful of survivors figured it out. They realized the rules of the game had completely changed. They just couldn't win on performance anymore. So they pulled off one of the most brilliant and radical pivots in modern business history. And you can really see this pivot by comparing two different paths. You had Omega, total engineering nerds, who just doubled down on what they knew. They tried to out-engineer the problem, and they failed, catastrophically. But then you had Patek Philippe. They had a totally different idea. They realized the future wasn't in the movement inside the watch, but in the shape of the case outside it. And this just illustrates a fundamental conflict Patek was dealing with. See, good design, pure design, often leads everyone to the same, simple, elegant solution, right? Like a basic round watch case. But branding needs to be different. It has to be unique. It pushes outward. So to stand out, you sometimes have to be deliberately different, not necessarily better in a purely functional sense.
So with this new focus on branding, the survivors wrote a brand new playbook. They totally shifted from advertising performance and accuracy to advertising price and, you guessed it, exclusivity.
Just take this ad for the iconic Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. They weren't hiding how much it cost. They were flaunting it. They turned the price from just a fact into the main benefit. The message was crystal clear. This is expensive, and that's the whole point.
They weren't selling you a tool to tell time anymore. No, they were selling you an asset, an investment, a symbol you wear on your wrist. It wasn't about what it did, it was about what it said about you.
And this message? It landed at the absolute perfect time. The rise of yuppie culture in the 80s created this whole new generation of buyers who were hungry for ways to show off their success. And a mechanical watch was perfect. It was visible, it felt more legitimate than other kinds of jewelry, and hey, it was just accurate enough that it didn't feel like a totally useless toy. This whole pivot created the bizarre world of watches that we all live in today. It's a world that a master watchmaker from that golden age would find completely and totally unrecognizable.
So first, our time traveler would see all these famous old brands in fancy boutiques and think, wow, business is booming. But it's an illusion. Most of those historic names are what you'd call zombie brands. They're just different storefronts owned by a handful of giant parent companies. Then he'd be shocked by the size of the watches. In his era, big meant cheap and clunky. Today, big means brand. It's the same logic that turned a functional Jeep into a luxury SUV. The whole point is to be seen, to be recognized from across a room.
But the biggest shock of all would come if he actually tried to buy one of today's most popular watches. He'd find out it's not a transaction, it's an application process. You have to prove you're worthy, you spend years on a wait list, and then if you get one, you're policed to make sure you don't sell it. The whole thing is built on artificial scarcity.
And the endgame of this whole strategy is this strange new business model. The watchmaker isn't just making watches anymore. They are actively, carefully managing an asset bubble where the brand itself and the scarcity around it is the real product.
So after all that, what's the big takeaway from this wild story? Because it really is about more than just watches. It's about a powerful force that shapes our entire world.
The source material offers this really simple but profound piece of advice. Don't get trapped working on brand, because ultimately that's an empty problem that's just focused on perception. Instead, go find and solve real interesting problems.
Because that's how you find a real golden age. It's not by looking for a label, but by just being part of a group of smart people working on something that actually matters. Which leaves us with one final fascinating thought. What great work is happening right now in some other field that future generations are going to look back on as a golden age?